Michael McDonald, you produced American Crime on ABC, which concluded just a couple of weeks ago, very shockingly. Let's go back to the beginning, though, and why don't you take us back to how this project got off the ground?
It started in the summer of 2013. I was sitting down with an ABC executive, and at the time the Trayvon Martin trial had captured America, and we were talking about these trials of the Jodi Arias trial of Trayvon Martin that just kind of captured things, and everyone's talking about them. What about them was so significant to American culture, and why can't we get that on network television? And we talked about how the people that are involved in the trials are actually more fascinating than what's actually happening, and that's what most of the newscasts were about. And so the other thing it was just like this general development meeting about what's not on the air. And the other thing that we talked about was race. That people haven't really tackled that in the broadcast space. And I was a huge fan of John Ridley's, not only his writing, and I just read the manuscript for 12 Years a Slave. The movie wasn't out, but I was just blown away by it. But John also has a political commentator, and he always had really interesting things to say on whether it be on Fox News or MSNBC or in the Huffington Post. And I just thought he'd be an amazing person. So I reached out to him, sent him an impassioned email, and we sat down and had a lunch. And during this lunch, we both found out we were huge fans of a number of documentaries like the Central Park Five and the Memphis 3, and there's another one called The Staircase. And all of those we just had the same affinity for this true crime, and it was about the people around it. And we looked up 3 hours after, a lunch was supposed to start, and there's nobody in the restaurant, there's just the two of us. And we had like this immediate bond about what we wanted to do and what he wanted to do mostly. And he came back 2 or 3 weeks later with the pitch as pretty much as you see it. Some minor changes, but about a show that was really about the people and the impact of one of these crimes. Not about the crime itself, not about the evidence, but about how it affects the families of both the accused and the people who are, the victims' families, and how they have to come together and race and faith and is all interwoven in that. And
Yeah,
that was the beginning of the show.
it's such a different perspective, and that is what really sets it apart from a lot of other, shows about crime on television. But what strikes me about this project specifically is that it's on broadcast TV. I mean, just take us through the challenges, first of all, of how you get this kind of material past, standards and practices and censorship and all those roadblocks. I mean, were there a lot of them?
There were significant roadblocks that were institutional, but luckily we had Paul Lee, the head of the network, who was so supportive of what we wanted to do, and that he was able to clear a lot of those roadblocks or help us navigate them. And really, they all sat back and pretty much said, deliver what you want to do and let us see what we can get on the air and how it. And, language was a barrier. Violence is not that much of a barrier with broadcast television, but drug usage was a barrier. But those are the specifics. But the way that we told the story, the way that there's multiple, disparate stories going on. There's not a definitive narrative through line. There's not a hero. Those sort of traditional things that you see in network television are not apparent, and they're very apparent in the show. And I think that's where it was really about the creative and about Paul Lee and his team of Channing and Brian and Vicky and all of those people getting behind us and saying, you know what, let's try this. Let's see if we can actually compete with the cable space and the way that the different platforms are putting shows out there. That you have to be a little bit more patient. You have to wait for the stories to unfold, and they were willing to try it, and they did. And so those things, we didn't have the barriers. They said, do it how the other formats are doing that, and then when it comes to the specifics of language and drug usage and violence and sex, let us help you navigate those. So, and they were really good about that. We had a lot of negotiations about language, but we got as much as we could on the air.
Yeah, it looks like you got away with quite a bit.
Yes.
Did it help at all that you had, a long background in development at ABC? You had a lot of relationships there, and obviously that's where you brought the project, and that's where, the genesis of it was at ABC.
Yeah.
Did it help that you had that background?
I think, I mean, John would say yes, absolutely. And I think it was, I knew what doors to open up. I knew who controlled what buttons, whether it be in business affairs, whether it be in BS&P. I also knew who the real players were and had a long-standing relationship with them. I'd been working there for over a decade. I'd run development at the studio. And so I knew who to go to, and I knew a little bit about the navigation and the politics of it and the way to approach things, because I had been on the other end of it. For many years. And so I knew how to do it because I'd witnessed other producers do it successfully. And then I think I also had John Ridley, who at the time was in the throes of winning an Academy Award and had become not only the person that I believed he was a great talent, the world recognized it. And so when you have him by your side, you may be able to open some doors because I know a door to open, but he's there to really open the door. And so it was a good partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a more gravitas by that point. He had an Oscar to his name, a very huge film. You obviously have this background as a very senior person in drama development at ABC. So let's talk about that briefly. Why did you decide to just leave that after so many years and start your own production company and then start making art, so to speak, from the other side of the fence? What made you do that?
I started years ago when I started in the business. I worked for a director, Sam Raimi, and had actually produced some television for him at the time. And it was always part of who I was. And I became an executive as a job, 10 years ago. And I just sort of worked my way through the company and worked my way up. And I suddenly looked around and I was like, I've achieved what I wanted to achieve. I was the head of development. I'd done everything I wanted to do, but I was in an office in Disney, and I love Disney. I love people, but I was in an office. I was never on set. I was never with, getting my hands dirty and being part of the thing that I came to LA to do and came to Hollywood and had done many years ago. And so when the time came and I just had, I have two twins and they were about to be born, and I recognized that my life was going to be very different. And I just wanted that back, that feeling of excitement when you're on a set and when you're working through problems and when you're really filmmaking, you're making a film, is what I came to LA to do. I wanted that back, and I had the great support of ABC Studios and Patrick Moran, who had been my boss at 3 different companies, now runs a studio. And we sat down and I said, I think it's time for me. And I had tried to leave and go become a producer a couple times on Ugly Betty. A friend of mine asked me to come be the executive producer of that when he was running it. And I tried to leave a couple years ago with a friend of mine, Lori Zacks, who now is running Mandeville, to start her own company. So I had wanted to do it. They knew I wanted to do it, and I felt like this was the right time to do it. And I had matured, and I'd also learned a lot there, and I think helped me. So it was always my end goal from the time I got here, was to start a production company. And Sam Raimi used to always tell me, I'll be pitching to you someday. And now hopefully it'll be happening. So
maybe it will. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then as far as making art, you know what? I've always believed that you just make the best television you can make. And if people want to define it as art, that's great. But I just want to tell real stories. And I do think, going back to who Sam Raimi was, he told me in the very beginning, like, this is the greatest platform in the world, that if you want to tell a story, you can reach more people in 1 hour than you can reach any other medium in the world through American television. And broadcast television is the broadest in the world. So why not do the best you can to be the best storyteller you can be? And you can reach more people in any place in the world. I mean, there's no other place that this many millions of people can see something and be a participant in what you're doing. So if you're going to make shows, make the best you can, or best you know how. And other people can define it as art if they want to. If they want to.
But I mean, you're so right. Television is so all-encompassing and so broad, and it really does reach every corner of this planet. And this particular story, it really touches on so many important issues. And as you say, it really beautifully reflects the impact of this crime on all of these different people. And you're really dealing with so many things. So there's, you know, African Americans, and there's white and Latino, and male and female and Muslim. In such a short time frame of 11 episodes, I would have thought one of the biggest challenges would have been to strike this balance between these different perspectives and not and give us insight rather than judging them from afar. How challenging was that to get it right and to show all these perspectives properly?
I think I don't know if we did it right. I think we did it the best we could, and I think it's for everyone else to judge whether we did it right. I think we had more story to tell. There's some story that's on the cutting room floor because there was so much. As far as getting it right, I think we did it honestly, and that's why you could say it's right. We had writers that literally had lived these lives and walked these lives, and we had, you know, actors who had lived and walked these lives. And I'm not saying just some of the actors like Richard and Johnny who'd actually been through the juvenile and judicial system. We had writers that had family and siblings that were touched by like violence. We had a very diverse group of directors, filmmakers that had never, you know, directed an episode of television before, but were amazingly talented DPs. We had documentarians directed. We brought people. It was very important for John and I to bring people to the table who could tell part of their own story. And, you know, John and I personally, you know, we are both in biracial relationships and marriages. You know, between us, my husband's Mexican American, his wife is Asian, he's Black, I'm white, I'm gay. Like we are of our own stories. We brought our own stories to that table. And I think we collected people along the way that brought some of their own truths to it. And so I think that's what you're seeing is those truths come out in the filmmaking, in the storytelling, and in the acting. And that's what we're really, really most proud of, is that we feel like we gathered a bunch of truths and told a story. And that's why it feels like there's so many different things going on, because it is a reflection of the people that were there to tell this American crime story, you know?
Yeah. Take us through the casting process. Were there any particular characters that were particularly challenging to get right?
I think we were more afraid as we started the process to get the right actors. We have this amazing casting director. Her name was Kim Coleman, and she hadn't done a network television show before. She had mostly features and worked with Spike Lee, and John had worked with her. And we brought her in, and she was able to find these amazing talents like Richard Cabral or Johnny Ortiz or Caitlin Gerard, or in Elvis. John had worked with Elvis, but these unknowns that had actually, they were real people, and they were just fabulous actors. And then as far as the parents and stuff like that, I think the piece that we needed to fall into the right piece was Felicity. And once she fell into place, like everything kind of worked out, because then we had that. Once she fell into place, then we knew her husband was perfect as Tim Hutton, because Tim was someone we kept going. We loved him. He came to us. We had lunch with him. We're like, he is Russ. We just hope we can find the right wife to match with him. And then once Felicity worked out, we're like, oh, this is perfect. And I think Penelope and Earl, you know, they came in and they did a great chemistry read for us. Again, they worked a nice balance to Felicity and Tim. Regina was someone that we just wanted from the minute that character came on the page. John said, I want Regina King, and she became available to us. So it was amazingly easier than you think. And I think it was because we didn't feel we had to fit within a certain thing. They didn't have to look a certain way. They didn't have to have so many credits on their resume. Like, again, the network was so supportive, and the team of saying, you know, Richard Cabral had never done anything but a few guest spots on Southland, and suddenly we're giving him this huge role. Johnny Ortiz, you know, was like, he had done McFarlane, but nobody had seen it, and we gave him this big role, and it's because they won it, and there was real and authenticity to them, you know.
Yeah.
So it was easier than I expected. Like I said, I was more fearful going in. We're like, okay, we're going to cast this. I'm like, how are we going to find these 9 amazing people? And it just became easy because the right people walked through our doors.
So let's talk about the actual show itself now that it's finished on the air. Was there a particular, this might be a Sophie's choice for you, but is there a particular scene or maybe story arc that really spoke to you personally, that really got you? Because there's certainly some for me and others that have seen the show, but I'm just curious, as a producer, you're so involved in it. And maybe it's hard for you to step back, but is there anything in particular about the show that you thought was a real success, that you really loved?
I mean, what I love about the show, and I'll be very honest and specific about myself, is there's so many different stories and different things going on. There are specific things that touch each person individually, I think, in very strong and powerful ways. There's two things that really just grabbed me, and you wouldn't think they're big. They're not big, but with Penelope and Earl, their story with Gwen, their daughter, it doesn't have as much prominence, but I personally, talking about being touched by violence and accident, my brother was in a terrible accident when I was younger, and I oftentimes, some of those scenes in the hospital, my brother has survived, and you meet him right now, he's an amazing man, and he was, he's a great scientist, and he's done very well, but there was, it was a very difficult accident. He was hit as a pedestrian by a train, so you can imagine it was very traumatic. Seeing my parents go through that and being helpless and trying to help their son, and those moments just destroyed me, as you can see, as I'm very upsetting to me, because I could see these actors bring to life things that I actually participated and witnessed in, and now that I'm actually a parent myself, I can't imagine the pain that it must be to see your child in a hospital bed. So those were things that, as it was happening, I didn't really share that with people, but there was moments, and I told both Penelope and Earl afterwards, some of the scenes when they're in the hospital, you brought some truth to the scene that I personally witnessed and was part of, and I think that to me was a story that hasn't really been told. But what is it like for a parent to see your child in a hospital bed and have to go through the recovery? And there's a scene where Earl talks about diapers, and you're just like, wow. And that's not something you see on television. The other scene that I think sums up everything about the show, it's another small moment. It's in the finale. And it's when Regina King comes into the hospital, and she's walking past. And at this point that Aubrey and Carter are both dead. Regina's sitting in the hospital, and Ruth, Aubrey's mother, walks in, and she walks past, and they turn and they hug each other. And they both just start sobbing. And that to me says that's what this show was about these two different people, these two different worlds that are touched by a moment, which is death and crime. And it happens, and we all feel exactly the same when we lose a loved one, or if we're put in prison or something. We feel the same. And here's a Black Muslim woman and a white privileged woman who feel that exact pain at that exact moment in time, and they just melt into each other's arms. And it just is so powerful to me to see that. And I think that sums up the whole show, is this happens all over America every day, and we all feel that exact same pain if this happens to us. And surprisingly, it happens to many, many, many people, and we don't talk about it. And so to me, that all people being murdered, the death and everything, that moment for me when those two women hug, who are not necessarily, it's not the big murder, it's not the death, it's not the gruesome thing, it's that moment when they hug each other. It's that's what I wanted from the show, was to say we all feel this. And by the way, the amazing thing about Regina King is she did not want to see Jennifer, who played Ruth, until that moment. So we kept them separate so that Regina could feel that moment when she turns and hugs her, that our actors they lived these parts so much. They were emotionally and physically became them. And it was amazing to be it was an honor to be a witness, watching a great play,
Yeah. It's so apparent watching this show, the critics have been really behind it, and obviously because it's really been such a success. And I've had the pleasure of speaking to many of the actors from the show, which has been great, because they've all given me such a great perspective, and they've all said how challenging it was, but how rewarding it was. And for me, as a white Australian, not American, I didn't know how it was going to affect me. And yet there's so much going on. As I said, for me, there was so much about parenting, or about being a parent. And for me, that's what got me the most. You know, Alonso Gutierrez, played by Benito Martinez, his story was very effective. As was, you know, Richard Cabral, who I'd never seen before and thought he would just be a stock standard kind of character that you see on shows like The Shield and Southland, and he brought this amazing sensitivity, and by the end of the series I just wanted to see more of him, you know. So that was really surprising. I never thought that would happen, and so that's the real success of this show. It's really the way that it's it doesn't really live up to the expectation that you're expecting, you know. It was a very unusual story. So yeah, I'm glad that you give us that insight, because there's so much to share about this show. There's so much going on. Yeah, there is. And I think that's the challenge of on broadcast television. Like, that is the challenge of the show. If this show had been on a you know, a Netflix or something where you could sit and watch it and consume it, like with commercials and stuff. But thank God ABC was willing to try it, you know. But there's so much going on. You're right. It's a challenge to watch, and we appreciate that people are willing to step up to the challenge. Absolutely. And so that brings me to this. Recently ABC announced that a second series, so to speak, would be airing next year, next season. That was a surprise. We thought that this would have just been a limited run and that would have been the end of it. So take us through that thinking and what will happen, given it's going to be a completely new storyline with new characters. Well, I mean, the title American Crime is really what we're holding on to, and we're going to, some of the actors like Tim and Felicity, we just so believe in them, and we believe they both can morph into various people. And I think there's something about bringing some continuity to the next season. But the second season will be a different crime in a different city, focusing on, in a different way, like how crime will affect families. And I will give a little sneak peek to what's happening for the next season. Is, as this system was focused much on race and the judicial system, we're going to be focused a little bit more on class and the educational system. And it's going to, you know, and it's the idea, it's going to take place in a younger environment, in a high school, public and private schools, and how, whereas in season one, it was about people coming into a community, all these families came together, they were disparate, they didn't know. What we're going to do this year is about how a crime within a closed community affects people that already know each other. And so it's going to be a little bit different in that these, instead of strangers in their separate silos, it's going to be about how one crime dropped into a closed environment will affect those people and affect the people that, your neighbors, your siblings, your teachers, your you know, the people you go to school with. So and I think that's what we want to kind of approach, because I think that's another thing that we weren't able to do, is what it was like for you to be affected by something violent or something, you know, a crime like with somebody that you know. And I think it's a really great, the writer, I was actually just in the writer's room right now, and they were pitching out some stuff. So they're working really, really hard. We have some amazing writers that are starting all over. It's like starting a whole new show. So it's kind of exciting, but it's kind of a little daunting. But yeah, just a tad, just a smidge daunting, I think. But that sounds really exciting. So we're looking forward to it. Thank you for that scoop. So that will we'll definitely make that clear on Gold Derby, that there's so much to look forward to next season. But in the meantime, Michael, good luck for the Emmys coming up in the next few weeks. Nominations will be announced next month. And we expect American Crime to be very much in the mix, and hopefully we'll see you all at the show in September. So thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.